Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with 3 cheese broccoli manicotti. That's right, you're in the mood for some cheesy, saucy Italian comfort food. But you're also trying to keep that promise to yourself to eat healthier and include more green vegetables. Which is why I'm so excited to share this easy stuffed pasta recipe, since we can do both. So yes, this is a compromise, but it's still a very delicious and satisfying one. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with a tutorial on how to prep broccoli. And I think what we should do first is cut off the tougher, more fibrous stems, and then we'll go ahead and slice those lengthwise like I'm doing here. And by separating the floury parts from the stems, we can treat this as 2 different vegetables with 2 different cooking times, since when you cook broccoli all together, those florets will always be overcooked by the time the stems are tender. And by the way, if any of the tops have like a thick stem attached, we can cut those in half. And then what we'll do once that little bit of knife work's done is head to the stove, and we will transfer the stems only into some generously salted boiling water. And we will boil those for 3 to 4 minutes to give them a head start. And then once those pieces are just starting to get tender, we will go ahead and add those much faster cooking tops. At which point we'll cook all this another 3 to 4 minutes, or until everything is just barely tender. And I mean just barely. Okay, it shouldn't be tough and raw and crunchy, but we don't want this soft either. So somewhere right in between. And that's it. Once we've reached that point of parboiled broccoli perfection, we'll go ahead and transfer that to a bowl of cold water, which will cool these down and immediately stop the cooking. And then after we let those sit in the water for a couple minutes, we'll transfer those to a colander to let them drain very, very, very well. Okay, we want this broccoli to be as dry as possible when we chop it. So we'll set that aside and let it drain thoroughly. And while that's happening, since we already have boiling water that's salted and flavored with broccoli, let's go ahead and cook our pasta tubes, which we will do for about 6 to 7 minutes, or whatever your package directions say, which will not be fully cooked and ready to eat. But don't forget, these are going to get baked with our sauce and cheese, so we do want these undercooked a bit. Oh, and I forgot to mention, do not throw away that bowl of cold water we used to shock our broccoli, since once our pasta is cooked, we will transfer it into that. And yes, sometimes one of these tubes will break open, but we only need 12, and they usually come 14 to a package, so that's fine. You can actually break 2 if you want. And once transferred in, we'll simply let our tubes sit in that cold water until we're ready to use them. And yes, you can drain these into a colander, and then put them back in the pot and fill that with cold water, but I think this is easier, and there's less chance of breakage. And then, assuming our broccoli is very, very well drained, we'll go ahead and transfer that to our cutting board and chop it up into small pieces, which I like to do by hand, since it only takes about 2 or 3 minutes. But you can also pulse this on and off in a food processor, which of course is way faster, but then you gotta clean that, and your broccoli will almost always end up too finely chopped. So I suggest working this over with a knife for a couple minutes, until we end up with something that looks like this. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I am prepping extra here. Right, we only need 3 cups of this stuff chopped for the recipe, but I'm gonna prep everything I have, so I have some extra for other recipes. Maybe for a salad or some fried rice. Oh yeah, that sounds good. And then to that we will add some finely minced or crushed garlic, along with some beautiful full-fat ricotta cheese. Although I guess technically you can use the lower fat version. I mean, you are after all the Fat Boy Slim of using the partially skimmed. But I want the richest, most delicious ricotta I can find. And then for our second and third cheeses, I'm going to do some grated provolone, which could, if you want, be mozzarella. But provolone has a lot more flavor, so I go with that. And then our final cheese will be the lovely and talented Reggiano Parmesan. But if you don't want it to taste as good, you can use the fake stuff if you want. And that's it. We'll finish our filling up with a couple whole large beaten eggs, plus some kosher salt, a few shakes of cayenne, some freshly ground black pepper, and then last but not least, a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg, which is about 10 to 20 times better than the nutmeg that comes already ground. And that's it. Once we've nutmegged our cheese filling, which by the way has a much different meaning in basketball. But anyway, once everything's in there, we'll go ahead and take a spoon and give this a mix. And we will keep mixing until we're 100% sure everything's been thoroughly combined. At which point we can pop that in the fridge to keep it cold until we need it. Which brings us to our last component, the sauce. And what I have here is our favorite prepared pasta sauce. And what I like to do here is add a few cups of water, and then we'll bring this up to a simmer on medium-high heat. And you don't have to, but the reason I'm thinning my sauce out is because I like to bake my manicotti in the sauce, and I don't want it to dry out and get too thick while that happens. So this is my very wet method. If you want to use a drier method, go ahead. And then what we'll do once our thinned out sauce is hot, we'll go ahead and ladle about a ½ inch into our largest baking dish, which I'm sure many of us refer to as our lasagna pan, which is what Michelle and I call this. And then besides the sauce, I'm going to add one optional but very special important ingredient. And that would be 1 cooked crumbled up Italian hot sausage, or just like we would prep if we were making pizza. And the reason we're doing it this way and not cooking it in the sauce is because I want sausage in the sauce, but I don't want a sausage sauce, which is what we get if we simmered the sausage in the sauce to begin with. Okay, that's going to permeate much more than this method. And yes, it does make a difference. And how much of a difference? I have no idea. And in case you're wondering, I call this the secret sausage technique. And that's it. Once our pan is sauced and sausaged, we can go ahead and transfer our filling into a piping bag or a plastic bag. And we will cut off the tips slightly smaller than the opening of our tubes, at which point we'll go ahead and fill our pasta up. And fair warning, if you squeeze too much in, these could break. So we do want these filled, but we don't want to overfill them. And yes, you can just use a teaspoon to push this in like my mom and grandmother did, but I find squeezing it in much easier. But either way, we'll go ahead and stuff 12 of those and place those in our pan. And as you're about to see, because of the size, I'm not able to get 2 neat rows of 6 on each side, so I'm going to have to angle these a little bit to make it work. Or I guess if we wanted, we could do some in one direction and then some the other, but somehow, some way, try to fit 12 in the best you can. Oh, and in case they're watching, which they're not, the company that makes these pasta tubes should make and sell a pan where 12 fit perfectly in 2 neat rows. Okay, can we get someone on that? And after that, we can figure out the hot dogs to hot dog bun package thing. Oh, and just in case more than 2 break, and you're forced to try to stuff a broken one, just do it like this. Or simply tear it completely open, and then pipe in the appropriate amount of filling, and then just roll it all back together with the seam on the bottom, and nobody will be the wiser. And to prove that, I'm going to secretly place this in the pan, and you'll see once these are done, you will not be able to know which one that is. And no, it was not that one. And then what we'll do once our pan is filled is go ahead and ladle in enough sauce just to barely cover. And as I mentioned earlier, I really like to bake these in the sauce. Right, some people don't use any sauce at all and just sauce them once they're done. But personally, I much more enjoy a smothered, very wet manicotti. But again, suit yourself, and feel free to put in as much or as little sauce as you want. And then before these are baked, I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle over some more freshly grated Parmesan. And yes, I used to use melty cheeses like mozzarella or provolone, but that can kind of fuse together into a tough layer on top. So these days I prefer to do the much easier to cut through Parmesan. And that's it. This is now ready to transfer into the upper center of a 375-degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes, or until it looks like this. Oh yeah, that looks good. Except that we had to angle them, and they are not in 2 neat rows, which really doesn't bother me, but it will bother some people a lot. And you know who you are. And then besides very, very carefully cleaning off the edges with a barely damp towel. All right, be careful, don't burn yourself. But besides that minor cleanup, I also think we should let these sit for about 10 minutes before we serve them. All right, just so that cheese filling can tighten up a little bit. And while we wait, we can go ahead and garnish this with some freshly chopped Italian parsley, since this is, after all, an Italian-American dish, and that is one of the rules. Oh, and can you tell which one is the broken one? No, I didn't think so. But anyway, let's go ahead and serve 2 of these up, along with, of course, some of our secret sausage sauce. And yes, of course we could have put that sausage in the filling, but I didn't want sausage in my manicotti. I wanted it around my manicotti. And then we will finish this in a very predictable way by grating over a little more Parmesan and maybe adding another pinch of parsley, which I think is nice, especially if you have to take some contractually obligated pictures, which I do, and I did. And then I grabbed a spoon and dug in. And that, my friends, as I mentioned in the intro, is a perfect culinary compromise. All right, on one hand, we're enjoying rich, decadent, cheesy, saucy Italian comfort food, but we are also at the same time getting a decent amount of broccoli, which as far as a ratio goes, I thought was the perfect amount. All right, if you put too little, then why bother? But we also don't want to use so much that we ruin this. So not to sound immodest, but I think this is the perfect formula, especially when everything's elevated by that little bit of secret sausage we snuck in. And as far as being frugal goes, we got away using 1 single Italian sausage, and it was enough to flavor this entire pan. So like I said, it is optional, but if you're feeding a bunch of meat lovers, It is a very economical way to make them happy. And yes, like many similar dishes, this will actually be better the next day, so try if you can to have leftovers. Although because of the broccoli content, on behalf of everybody that works at the same office you do, we would like you not to reheat this in the office break room microwave. Right, that is just not considerate. Which reminds me, this is also delicious cold. But whether you have leftovers or not, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.